Before we begin, breathe once. Slow. Deep. Because what I'm about to tell you is not entertainment. It's not a story. It's an initiation. And every initiation demands a price. Now listen carefully, because these next few seconds will feel like someone else is listening with you. They say she vanished in 1842. A quiet girl from a quiet town. No enemies. No history. No reason to disappear. But last night, a man walking alone on County Road 12 saw her. Same face. Same height. Same pale dress from the missing person sketch. 183 years later. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply froze. Because every instinct inside him knew he wasn't looking at a ghost. He was looking at something returned. Now, before you think this is superstition or folklore, you need to understand who I am. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to strip the surface off reality and show you the machinery beneath it. The machinery built by men who mastered control centuries before this country even had a name. And Alara, the girl who vanished, was one of the first pieces in their system. You see, the early American elite did not rise through trade, politics, or intellect. Those were masks, decorations for the public. Their real ascent came from something you were never meant to learn, the extraction of consciousness. Not immortality. That's a fairy tale for desperate minds. No, they pursued continuity, the ability to preserve identity through hosts, through bloodlines, through generations. And the ritual they created required three things: a compliant vessel, a grieving community, and a disappearance that looked like fate. Ilara provided all three. But here's the fracture in their system, the detail they couldn't erase. Her final journal entry wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't the voice of a child. It was defiance. They follow the rules of men. I follow the one who wrote the rules. Understand this: when a vessel resists, she doesn't die. She disconnects. She steps outside their reach. She becomes something they cannot predict or contain. And last night, she walked again, not as prey, but as a message. A message meant for men like you. If you want to descend further, good. If you're still here, then you're the kind of man who doesn't flinch when reality splits open. Most people turn back at the first crack. But you lean in. So let me take you deeper. The town where Alara vanished, Greywater, was built with an architecture that never made sense. Streets arranged in geometric patterns no settler could explain. A church facing the wrong direction. A cemetery placed exactly where the soil was weakest. And at the center of it all, a foundation stone carved with symbols no historian has ever catalogued publicly. Why? Because Greywater wasn't designed for people. It was designed for containment. An early American experiment in emotional control. Every house positioned to concentrate grief. Every alley angled to distort sound. Every window placed to give the illusion of being watched. A full psychological lattice, a town shaped not to live in, but to feed through. And the families who built it knew exactly what they were doing. You'll never find their names in textbooks. Not in the patriot lists. Not in the founding documents. But if you look into the personal letters of early judges, pastors, and land surveyors, you will find the same phrase repeated in coded margins: the weavers. They weren't a cult. They weren't a religion. They were architects, men who believed the human mind was raw material, and that emotion, especially grief, was a resource waiting to be harvested. Ilara was not their first vessel, but she was their most promising. Because unlike the others, she didn't break. She didn't collapse under the pressure of isolation or fear. Instead, she listened. Not to them, but to something beneath Greywater. Something older than their rituals, older than their symbols, older than their arrogance. And when the night came, the night of her disappearance, the weavers performed their transfer ritual with absolute confidence. But halfway through it, every candle went out. Every window shattered inward. And the man leading the ritual screamed a sentence that no one could explain. She is not alone. The next morning, Ilara was gone. The weavers sealed the records. And the town began a century-long tradition of pretending nothing had happened. But it did. And last night proved it. She's back, and she's not walking alone. Before we go further, I want you to understand something clearly. What's happening now is not a haunting. This is not some girl returning for closure. This is strategy. Calculated. Deliberate. Precise. Because Ilara didn't come back as the same girl who vanished. She returned as someone who crossed a threshold the weavers themselves never understood, a threshold they thought they controlled. And that's why her return terrifies them even now, 183 years later. Let me take you to the night she truly disappeared. The weavers gathered in the basement of the oldest house in Greywater, a house that still stands today, though the owners never sleep in the basement anymore. They say the walls pulse at night, like something enormous is breathing behind them. The ritual was simple in design, brutal in purpose. Ilara was placed in a wooden chair carved with the same spiraling markings found on the town's foundation stone. Her hands tied, her eyes covered. But she didn't struggle. Not once. The lead weaver, Samuel Hargrove, recorded that her heartbeat never rose above resting rate, as if she had already accepted her fate, or anticipated something the rest did not. What happened next is where the records fracture. One journal says the basement floor cracked open. Another claims a voice spoke from inside Ilara's chest in a language no one had ever heard. A third insists the candles bent toward her, as if pulled by an invisible wind. But all three sources agree on one moment. Ilara lifted her head and whispered something so quietly they couldn't tell if it was in the room or in their minds. They translated it later as best they could. "You are using the wrong doorway." And before they could ask what she meant, every symbol on the walls, symbols the weavers had been using for decades, glowed red. Not bright, not burning, just aware. Finally awakened by someone who understood them. The weavers panicked. The ritual collapsed. The lights died. And when they relit the torches, Ilara was gone. Not escaped, not taken, gone, as if she had slipped between the seconds of time. The weavers sealed the basement. They buried the notes. They rewrote the story. And yet, last night, she walked past that same house. Slowly, as if checking whether those men were still pretending they were ever in control. "Good. You're staying with me." Most men don't. Most feel the walls shifting around them and choose the comfort of ignorance. But ignorance is a cage, and tonight, you're stepping out of it. Let's move deeper. After Ilara vanished, Greywater changed in ways the history books never documented. The weavers claimed everything was handled, but the town itself told a different story. Subtle fractures, strange alignments, patterns that only a trained mind notices. Windows began to frost from the inside. Dogs refused to walk near the old Hargrove house. Children woke up sleepwalking toward the woods, murmuring a name their parents had never taught them. And the weavers, for the first time in their recorded history, were afraid. Because they didn't just lose a vessel. They lost control. Their ritual failed. Their symbols awakened on their own, and the energy they thought they commanded now moved without them. Understand this. Real power is not about domination. It's about direction. Guiding unseen forces, pulling the threads of belief, memory, fear, obedience. The weavers had built a system designed for one purpose, to shape emotion into influence. A grieving town bows to authority. An afraid town clings to its leaders. A confused town stops asking questions. But Ilara's disappearance didn't create obedience. It created suspicion. Subtle at first, a glance here, a whisper there, then spreading like roots under soil. Men avoided church. Women locked their doors before sunset. Old families stopped trusting one another. Greywater's emotional grid fractured, and the weavers realized something they had refused to consider. The ritual didn't fail. It succeeded in a way they never intended. Because whatever Ilara connected to, whatever answered her when she listened, didn't just take her. It walked through her. And that kind of presence does not dissipate. It waits. It returns. It studies. Which brings us to last night. The man who saw her, he didn't just see a girl in an old dress. He described something behind her. Not a figure. Not a shadow. A distortion. Like the A itself was folding around a shape it couldn't contain. And when he blinked, the girl stopped walking, turned her head, and whispered something he couldn't explain. "You kept the town. I kept the doorway." Greywater had always been strange, but after Ilara vanished, the strangeness sharpened into something deliberate, like the town itself was adjusting, shifting, preparing for a return no one understood. The weavers tried to tighten their grip, tried to restore the emotional lattice they had spent decades constructing, but fear changes shape when its source is unknown. They could manipulate grief. They could manipulate guilt. But fear born from the realization that your enemy isn't human, that kind of fear spreads beyond design. Families started hearing footsteps under their floorboards at night, pacing slowly, rhythmically, as if measuring the house above. People reported waking up to see impressions on their mattress, shallow dips, as if someone had been sitting there, silently watching. Doors opened without sound, candles extinguished without wind, and yet nothing ever threatened them directly. It simply observed. That kind of presence breaks a community in half, those who deny, and those who obey. The Weavers knew why this was happening, but they couldn't admit it, not publicly, not even among themselves. Their ritual had opened a doorway they didn't control, a doorway Alara had aligned with something older than their bloodlines. They had always believed they operated at the top of the hierarchy of hidden knowledge. They thought they were the architects. But when the symbols carved into Greywater's stone foundations began glowing faintly on their own at night, pulsing like a heartbeat, they realized they were not architects. They were tenants, borrowers, children playing with a mechanism built by something that did not care about their titles, names, or ancient agreements. Then came the incident at the high school in 1974. Students claimed the fire alarm went off during a storm, but the security tapes, now erased, but once briefly leaked, show something else. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every locker door opened simultaneously. Not violently, not chaotically. They opened softly, politely, as if responding to a presence they recognized. And on the chalkboard appeared a sentence written in a handwriting no one could trace. I did not return for them. I returned for what is owed. The Weavers erased it within hours, reclassified the incident as electrical malfunction, and tightened surveillance across town. But they couldn't tighten it enough, because the presence didn't move through buildings or streets. It moved through people, through moments, through attention. And that brings us to the detail they feared most. Last night, when Alara walked past the old Hargrove house, she stopped. Not in hesitation, not in confusion, but with the certainty of someone returning to a place that once dared to imprison her. And the air around her folded inward, like space itself was bowing. Ilara's return was not accidental. It never is. Presence like haze doesn't wander aimlessly. It surveys, it judges, it recalibrates. Last night, the witnesses described something impossible. Her movements were too precise, too deliberate, as if she carried centuries of knowledge in every step. And she wasn't alone, not entirely. There was a weight beside her, a distortion that bent the fog, reshaping shadows. The kind of presence that makes your stomach hollow before your mind even realizes danger exists. Men who claimed to be brave found themselves frozen in the dark, unable to speak or even look directly at her. Because once you see her clearly, you realize she is no longer entirely human, or at least not in the way your biology can fully comprehend. Her eyes, they said, were older than the town itself, filled with awareness that transcended centuries of manipulation, ritual, and cruelty. And in those eyes, the witnesses swear they saw the Weavers, every one of them, judged and found inadequate. The Weavers had spent lifetimes perfecting control systems designed to manipulate grief, fear, and obedience. Greywater was their laboratory. The missing girl was their instrument. And yet, Alara had turned their own system against them. She had learned to navigate the emotional grid of the town like a master. Every step she took last night was a message, a proof that the mechanism they relied upon so heavily could fail if confronted by someone who understood its architecture. And Alara did understand. She knew where the pressure points were, where the currents of fear ran strongest, and how to avoid traps they had spent decades perfecting. That's why her return is dangerous. Not just for the Weavers, but for anyone who has relied upon rules laid down centuries ago by those who assumed knowledge equals control. It does not. Understanding the system is one thing, bending it to your will is another, and Alara has done both. But there's more. Witnesses report that when she passed Sightings corners, Sightings windows, the environment reacted. Trees shifted, mist spiraled unnaturally, and small animals scattered in ways that defied wind patterns or gravity. It was as if the town itself recognized her authority. And in that recognition lies the truth no historian will ever write. Greywater, and the Weavers who built it, were never masters. They were caretakers, servants to something far older and far more intelligent than their rituals, their symbols, their centuries of meticulous planning. And now, she had returned not for vengeance, not for reconciliation, but for reclamation, reclaiming what had been taken, what had been attempted, and what had been broken long before anyone alive remembered. Ilara did not walk as a frightened girl, and she did not walk as a victim. She moved with the authority of someone who had seen the inner wakings of time itself and returned to inspect the results. Those who saw her described her gait as unnaturally steady, almost gliding, as if the air itself carried her forward. Her presence stretched beyond the physical. Men described hearing a low hum, a vibration that seemed to originate from the soil, the walls, even the fog itself. And yet, there was no wind, no source, only her, and the weight of what she represented, what she carried, what she had survived. The weavers, in their arrogance, believed they could manipulate life, fear, and grief as though they were tools in a clockwork machine. They had learned to bend communities, to orchestrate obedience, to cultivate terror without ever touching their victims. But in the moment Ilara disappeared, she had tapped into something the weavers had never anticipated, a force that operated outside their grid, outside their centuries of calculated influence. She became a conduit, a vessel not for submission, but for awakening. And that awakening does not respect control. It does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It moves, it observes, it responds, and it remembers. What makes this dangerous for the unprepared is how subtle it is. The town did not erupt in chaos when she appeared. People did not scream or collapse. The change is quieter, more insidious. Witnesses report a deep unease, a sense that reality is wrong, that time and memory have been bent around a truth they cannot name. Their hands shake slightly when recounting it. Their hearts race before they speak. And the ones who saw her closest, those who locked eyes with her in the fog, report a clarity that is terrifying, a sense of purpose and understanding far beyond what a human mind should contain. And yet, even with this knowledge, most of the town remains blind. They go to work, they argue over mundane problems, they sleep unaware. But beneath the surface, the grid is changing. Patterns they can't see are shifting. Symbols carved long ago in stone foundations, thought meaningless, are aligning with her return. Her passage is mapping something, constructing something, preparing for an event none of them understand. And those who notice are already marked, by awareness, by recognition, by the simple fact of seeing her and surviving to tell it. What the witnesses cannot articulate fully is this: Ilara does not merely inhabit space, she manipulates perception. The fog curls around her body as if obeying a command, shadows bend toward her presence, and even the most rational minds feel their awareness stretch, strain, and sometimes fracture in her presence. Those who have glimpsed her speak of time bending, of moments elongating unnaturally, of entire memories that seem to shift and reorder themselves while she passes. This is not imagination. This is a force older than the weavers themselves, older than the town, older than the very foundations of Greywater. And it is learning, observing, waiting. The weavers' original design, their centuries of meticulous planning, was built on a fundamental principle, that humans respond predictably to grief, fear, and ritual. They created an architecture of compliance, a lattice of control that measured emotional resonance and engineered obedience. Every street, every building, every symbol in Greywater was placed to amplify these energies. And for decades, it worked. Entire generations of the town became puppets of this invisible hand, their grief and fear shaped into power for the few who understood the mechanisms. But when Ilara disappeared, she bypassed every contingency. Her mind did not fracture under pressure. Her spirit did not break. And her return demonstrates a horrifying truth. The Weaver's system is not infallible. It can be reversed. It can be rewritten. And that is the threat they fear most. Because Ilara's return is not vengeance. It is reclamation. She is aligning the town's energy to her own purpose, redirecting the lattice of control in ways the weavers cannot anticipate or intercept. Every step she takes recalibrates the invisible forces that they believed they mastered. Every observer is forced to confront an internal dissonance, questions they never asked and cannot unask. Her presence is a living critique of centuries of manipulation, a proof that even the most sophisticated systems can fail when confronted with intelligence, resilience, and will that is older than the rules themselves. And the most terrifying detail: this is only the beginning. She has returned to ensure something unfolds, a process that has been planned for centuries but never completed, because the weavers always assumed they could predict outcomes. They were wrong. She is patient, methodical, and she does not forgive error. For men like them, And for men like us who witness the events unfold, this is a test of perception, comprehension, and courage. And once you see the mechanism she is manipulating, there's no turning back. Ilara's influence is not limited to what can be seen. It penetrates the psyche, infiltrates patterns of thought, and awakens instincts that most humans have long buried. Men who have studied history, philosophy, or psychology report that encountering her, or even knowing of her return, triggers an uncanny awareness. They notice the smallest inconsistencies in the world around them. A clock that ticks too fast, a shadow that does not match its source, a whisper of movement when no one is there. And in those moments, fear is not the dominating emotion. It is understanding, recognition, the creeping realization that the system you trust, the reality you depend on, is not as solid as you believed. The Weavers built Greywater to be a perfect containment, yet her presence proves that containment is an illusion, and anyone who assumes control can be observed, manipulated, or undone by forces they cannot perceive. Her return also exposes the weaknesses of human institutions designed to maintain secrecy. Records vanish, testimonies are ignored, events are erased or rationalized away, and yet the echoes remain. Ilara's movements are a message to the men who orchestrated her disappearance and to their modern successors. No system is flawless, no archive permanent, no control absolute. They believed grief could be contained, that compliance could be engineered through fear, that generations could be molded like clay. But the laws they created, the rituals they performed, the symbols they carved, they were never complete. They were blueprints for someone like her to exploit, someone with knowledge, patience, and the capacity to see beyond the visible threads. Witnesses report a detail that even the Weavers did not anticipate: Ilara's ability to operate within the town's architecture without disturbing the physical order. She does not break windows, topple objects, or leave fingerprints. Yet, her presence warps the intangible lattice of energy and attention. People nearby experience déjà vu, sudden recollections of events that never happened, and an overwhelming sense of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something that measures intent, not appearance. This is how she communicates, how she realigns the power structures built over centuries. Her return is a lesson, a warning, and a demonstration of the fundamental truth that mastery of perception is more powerful than mastery of flesh. And now, as the fog rolls over Greywater once more, the men who once thought themselves untouchable are quietly observing. They do not see her face in the mist, they see her purpose. They do not hear her footsteps, they feel her calculations. And this is what makes her return more dangerous than any ghost story, ritual, or legend ever told. She has returned not to frighten, but to awaken those capable of seeing. Ilara was never simply a girl of Greywater. She was the product of a lineage of attention, observation, and manipulation that stretched far beyond the town itself. The Weavers, those men who prided themselves on absolute control, had always selected vessels not for strength, but for compatibility with the unseen, a resonance that could survive the strain of crossing between systems older than the nation. She was chosen because her mind could hold contradictions, embrace paradox, and perceive layers of reality the average human mind could not. And that is what made her invaluable to the ritual, and what made her unstoppable in her return. This is not speculation. This is the hidden science of control, recorded in journals the Weavers tried to destroy, encrypted in diaries that remain hidden in private collections. They believed they were shaping her destiny, but she was shaping theirs. And last night, as she walked the streets, the echoes of that shift were palpable. The Weavers' agenda was meticulous. They did not just remove her, they attempted to harness her consciousness. The alien architecture of Greywater, the alignment of streets, the cryptic symbols, the placement of key buildings, all were engineered to bend human emotion into predictable outcomes. Grief, fear, and hope were measured, calculated, and redistributed as energy that fed the families at the top of the hierarchy. Every disappearance, every tragedy, every seemingly random calamity was a tool to reinforce their lattice. But what they failed to account for was an intelligence that could interface with their system, read its currents, and redirect them. And that intelligence was Ilara. She was the first vessel to survive beyond the ritual, not broken, not enslaved, but aware, adaptive, and patient. Her return exposes the fractures of a system humanity believes is permanent. Institutions, archives, governments, they are all fragile. They crumble in the presence of one who understands the mechanics behind them. And the Weavers, for all their knowledge, are as vulnerable as any man who underestimates his own shadows. Witnesses describe her as calm, almost serene, yet each of her steps carries authority. The authority of someone who has observed centuries of manipulation and knows exactly how to undo it. This is not a ghost story. This is strategy, observation, mastery of perception. And the most dangerous thing, those who recognize her presence begin to change. Their priorities, their beliefs, their understanding of truth shifts. This is how influence spreads without violence, through awareness, attention, and alignment with forces older than human law. And so, the town sleeps, unaware, as the weaver's old designs falter and the lattice bends under her command. She is not here to frighten. She is here to reclaim. She is here to demonstrate that no system, no hierarchy, and no lineage of power is absolute. Every observer of her now carries the knowledge that a single mind, resilient, patient, and attuned to the unseen, can overturn centuries of engineered control. The ritual that claimed Alara was not a simple ceremony. It was a mechanism, a system designed to extract, contain, and redistribute consciousness. The weavers did not call it by name. They referred to it only in cryptic notes as the alignment. Its purpose was not mere immortality, nor simple domination. It was preservation of control across generations. The weaver's insight was brutal and precise. If you control the emotion of a population, if you engineer grief and obedience, you can shape history itself. But for the ritual to succeed, a vessel like Alara was required. She had to be compliant, resilient, and perceptive, qualities the weavers believed they had measured and mastered. What they did not anticipate, however, was her ability to perceive the currents running beneath their structure, to identify the system itself, and to bend it from within. The ritual failed, not because it was flawed, but because she was stronger than their assumptions. Ilara's final act in 1842 was not disappearance, it was transcendence. Witnesses centuries later described seeing her presence like a shadow bending the fog, an energy reshaping the environment around her. The weavers tried to erase the evidence, burning journals, sealing basements, rewriting town records, but the imprint remained. And that imprint is what is surfacing now. Her movements, her awareness, are teaching the town, and anyone who observes her, lessons the weavers never intended to be revealed. They are lessons in observation, in comprehension, in understanding that control is a system, and systems can be read, predicted, and reversed. The most chilling part of her return is that it is not random. It is intentional. She walks with purpose, activating old alignments, observing old structures, and testing reactions. Every person who sees her experiences subtle shifts in perception, a slight unease, a fleeting insight, a knowledge they cannot yet articulate. These are signals, markers of awakening. And the weavers, centuries removed, watch helplessly as the very architecture they designed to ensure obedience now channels liberation. What they could never understand, she now demonstrates. The lattice of fear and grief they perfected is no longer theirs. It belongs to the one who can read it, the one who can bend it, the one who survived. And now, as the fog thickens over Greywater, the lines between observer and observed blur. The rules the weavers set down no longer govern the space. The town is an arena, and Alara has returned not as a participant, but as the director. Every footstep, every pause, every glance communicates more than words ever could, and the men who once held absolute authority are now reduced to spectators. Ilara's survival was never accidental. Every step she took in 1842, every thought she harbored in her final days before disappearance, was part of a pattern the weavers never fully comprehended. They believed the ritual was a closed system, that vessels were simply conduits for power, emotion, and obedience. But Alara was different. She had the rare ability to interface with the currents beneath the weaver's design. She perceived the hidden architecture of influence, the flow of fear, grief, attention, and ritual energy, and she learned to bend it subtly, without breaking it. The ritual, which was intended to imprison her consciousness, inadvertently strengthened it. By attempting to force her into their system, they gave her a blueprint of control she could manipulate and tame. This is why her return is not chaotic. It is precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly intelligent. The weaver's agenda relied on a predictable human response: grief, despair, and obedience. They measured, engineered, and amplified emotion, believing it would sustain their authority indefinitely. Greywater itself was a laboratory for their calculations, a lattice of compliance where every street, building, and symbol amplified their designs. But Alara's awareness transcended that system. She understood it, navigated it, and ultimately used it to her advantage. The town, for all its centuries of manipulation, became a tool not for the weavers, but for her. Every witness who saw her last night became an unintentional participant in her demonstration. Their observations, their confusion, and even their fear are now part of the lattice she controls, a living map of influence being redirected. What makes this particularly dangerous is that her knowledge is recursive. She does not just act upon the weaver system, she teaches it to those capable of understanding. Anyone perceptive enough to notice the anomalies, the distortions, and the hidden alignments begins to internalize the same principles the weavers used for centuries. Their control, once absolute, is now a lesson, and like any powerful lesson, it transforms those who receive it. Men who witness a movement begin to see patterns, notice flaws, and question the integrity of the systems they trusted. Greywater becomes not just a town, but a classroom, and Alara is the instructor. And the most unsettling truth, she does not need to speak to teach. Her presence alone communicates with clarity beyond words. Every step, every glance, every pause resonates through the unseen lattice of the town. Those who observe her cannot remain the same. Their minds, their understanding, their sense of what is possible, all shift subtly, irreversibly. This is why her return is not just a local phenomenon. It is an awakening. The weaver's rituals were never meant to be fully understood by outsiders, or even by the participants themselves. On the surface, they appeared as symbols, ceremonies, and incantations. Beneath, they were precise systems of manipulation and energy transfer. Every chant, every placement of objects, every alignment of symbols had a function: to concentrate consciousness, bend perception, and maintain control across generations. But what the weavers failed to recognize was that the source of their power was never in the ritual itself, it was in the responsiveness of the vessel. The human mind, attuned to hidden structures, capable of subtle observation and resilience under pressure, became the engine. Alara was that engine. She absorbed the mechanics of their design, analyzed the flow of influence, and used it to cultivate her own awareness. In effect, the weavers built their own undoing, and she became its operator. Her disappearance in 1842 was not a loss, it was a transfer. The ritual, intended to bind her, instead elevated her to a level of perception the weavers could not measure or anticipate. Witnesses centuries later described phenomena that aligned perfectly with the notes and diagrams the weavers attempted to hide: distortions in time, unexplainable shadows, changes in sound and light, and a presence that bends attention itself. When she returned, even briefly, last night, those patterns reemerged. Fog curled unnaturally, shadows shifted against the natural flow of light, and observers reported moments where reality itself seemed paused, a space where perception stretched thin and the mind could not reconcile what it saw. This is not supernatural theater. It is applied system control, now operating without the limitations the weavers once imposed. Greywater itself has become a conduit. The town is no longer just a location, it is a network of observation, attention, and influence, subtly reacting to Alara's presence. Each structure, each path, each lingering symbol she passes amplifies the unseen currents she now directs. Witnesses feel it in instinct, not thought, a tightening in the chest, a faint pull in vision, the sense that they are being observed not just by her, but by forces older than any record or ritual. And because this influence operates beneath ordinary comprehension, even the weaver's descendants cannot detect it fully. The lesson is clear: control is never absolute. Systems built to dominate minds can be read, understood, and inverted by someone capable of perceiving the hidden architecture. Alara is proof. She is the anomaly they could not contain, the intelligence that learned their mechanisms, and the force that now demonstrates the fragility of their centuries-long authority. For anyone observing her, the implication is profound. Mastery of perception outweighs mastery of power. Alara's return is not merely a spectacle, it is instruction. Those who witness her presence, whether consciously or subconsciously, are being trained to see beyond the superficial layers of reality. Every step she takes, every pause she makes, communicates a lesson in systems the weavers once used to control lives. She does not speak in words, she teaches through observation. The lattice of influence she navigates, the network of fear, grief, and obedience woven into Greywater over centuries, responds to her movements. Those who are perceptive feel subtle shifts in attention, instincts sharpen, and a deep understanding of patterns begins to form. Her return demonstrates that awareness itself can be a weapon, and that understanding systems of control allows one to redirect them, even without formal power. This is the core of the danger and the awakening. The Weavers, for all their meticulous planning, operated on the assumption that emotion could be engineered, that obedience could be harvested like grain, and that patterns of grief could be replicated indefinitely. But Ilara's survival and return exposed the flaw in their model. Consciousness, intelligence, and perception are variables no formula can fully contain. When a mind as perceptive as hers engages with a system of control, it reads, maps, and redirects its flows. And the consequences are profound. People who observe her, even unknowingly, begin to notice anomalies, misalignments in structures, unaccounted reactions in people, subtle distortions in what they previously considered reality. These are the markers of awakening, the signals that the lattice of influence is now under a new operator. The witnesses of last night describe more than fear. They report clarity, the kind of insight that leaves an indelible mark on the mind. Patterns previously invisible become visible. Weaknesses in authority, gaps in logic, and points of manipulation emerge like a map before them. Ilara demonstrates that control is not a matter of brute force or ritual alone. It is about perception, awareness, and the ability to act with patience and precision. And she moves with decades, no, centuries, of observation guiding every motion. The town itself has become her classroom. Greywater's fog, its shadows, its geometry, and even the lingering fears of its inhabitants respond to her movements. Those attuned to her presence cannot remain unchanged. Observation transforms them, awakens them to the underlying currents the Weavers relied on, and challenges the notion that power resides solely in those who claim it. Her return is proof. Mastery over hidden systems is the highest form of authority, and those who can perceive it are never truly powerless. Ilara's influence extends beyond mere presence. It is encoded in the subtleties of her movement, the timing of her steps, and the gestures she allows to be seen. Witnesses describe patterns, repetitive, almost ritualistic sequences, that feel unconscious, yet are deliberate. She activates symbolic markers embedded within Greywater, some carved into stone centuries ago, others encoded into the layout of streets, windows, and public spaces. These markers are not signs of superstition. They are instruments of perception. Those who notice them experience a shift in awareness. Their minds begin to track connections, to see structures beneath what they believed was ordinary. What the Weavers intended to be tools of control, she now uses as instruments of awakening. These symbols are subtle, often invisible to those who are untrained or unwilling to see. A slight turn of a corner, a particular alignment of shadows at twilight, a sequence of gestures that would seem meaningless to the casual observer. These all serve to communicate principles of hidden architecture. Men who notice them report a sudden clarity, the realization that systems of control are predictable, measurable, and ultimately manipulable. The lattice of influence the Weavers spent centuries refining is not immutable. It bends when engaged correctly, and Ilara, having survived their greatest ritual and returned, is teaching the town, and anyone perceptive enough to observe, a fundamental lesson. Perception is power, and understanding the hidden mechanisms behind influence allows one to redirect them. Her teaching is subtle but profound. Those who witness the markers feel a deep resonance, a sense of connection with forces normally invisible. The fog, the shadows, the layout of the streets, they are not just environment, they are conduits. Attention itself becomes a resource, and understanding how to direct it is a skill she imparts without speaking. Men and women who engage with these signals report a transformation. They see patterns in behavior, in architecture, in ritual. They understand that history is not merely recorded, it is engineered. They recognize the cracks in authority and the vulnerabilities hidden in systems designed to feel permanent. This is why her return is dangerous to the Weavers and enlightening to those prepared to perceive. Control was never meant to survive scrutiny, and awareness cannot be contained. Greywater, a town built to harvest grief and obedience, is now a classroom for awakening, and Ilara is the master. Every observer is tested, every subtle perception is a lesson, and every moment spent in her presence is an initiation. She is not here to destroy. They cannot destroy her, but to teach, awaken, and demonstrate the fragility of systems built on fear and predictability. The consequences of witnessing Alara are not immediate, nor are they simple. They are subtle, cumulative, and irreversible. Those who see her, or even sense her presence, experience a shift in perception that begins with unease but grows into clarity. Ordinary patterns of thought fracture, assumptions unravel, and the structures of authority they once relied on appear suddenly transparent. Men report that events they previously accepted as random or unavoidable now reveal themselves as engineered. Subtle manipulations, long-hidden hierarchies, and orchestrated grief become visible. The lattice of influence the weavers cultivated over centuries no longer conceals its mechanisms. Observation becomes awareness, awareness becomes understanding, and understanding becomes empowerment. But with empowerment comes responsibility. Once perception is awakened, it cannot be put to sleep again. The weavers' descendants, trained to maintain secrecy and compliance, now face an unexpected vulnerability. Their rituals, once thought infallible, are now legible to anyone attuned to the hidden patterns. The symbols they carved, the alignments they established, the rules they imposed, all of it is readable, interpretable, and, most importantly, manipulable by a mind capable of perception beyond ordinary human constraints. This is why Alara's return is both terrifying and instructive. It demonstrates the fragility of power built on fear and the inevitability of awakening for those capable of observation. Greywater, the town itself, is the instrument of this lesson. The fog, the shadows, the angles of streets, even the whispers of wind through trees, they all respond to attention, and her movements calibrate them like a maestro guiding an orchestra. Those who see her feel a dual effect. They are simultaneously terrified and enlightened. Fear arises from the realization that reality is malleable, that systems designed to dominate are not absolute, and that one mind, patient, aware, and courageous, can subvert centuries of control. Enlightenment comes from the recognition that perception is the true source of power. The ability to discern patterns, to understand the mechanisms behind manipulation, and to redirect them is a form of mastery the weavers themselves never fully achieved. Every observer becomes a participant in a hidden curriculum, whether they understand it or not. Their minds are being tested, expanded, and awakened, all by her silent guidance. And now, as the fog thickens over Greywater and shadows stretch unnaturally, the lesson becomes undeniable. Systems built on obedience and fear are temporary. Awareness is permanent. Those who witness her are forever changed, marked by understanding, and compelled to see beyond the veil. This is the essence of her return, the hidden purpose of her survival, and the reason the weavers, despite centuries of influence, can no longer maintain their control. The weavers were not ordinary men. Their lineage, carefully guarded and meticulously recorded in hidden journals and coded letters, stretches across centuries. They were architects of perception, masters of control who understood human emotion as a quantifiable resource. Each generation refined the lattice of influence, learning which rituals reinforced obedience, which symbols amplified grief, and which alignments of architecture could channel attention with surgical precision. They were brilliant, yes, but arrogant. They assumed the mind could be mastered like clay, predictable, malleable, and ultimately compliant. And for centuries, their system worked because no one had the insight to observe it fully. Until Alara. Alara was different. From a young age, she demonstrated an uncanny awareness of patterns that others missed. She noted inconsistencies in the weaver's instructions, contradictions in their logic, and the subtle manipulations designed to guide her behavior. While other vessels might have submitted to the ritual, she engaged with it. She learned it. She mapped it. And in doing so, she discovered its vulnerabilities. The architecture of fear, grief, and obedience that the weavers had built was brilliant, but rigid, predictable. And every rigid system has blind spots. Alara exploited these blind spots, not with brute force, but with observation, patience, and a precision that the weavers could not anticipate. Her disappearance in 1842 was not escape. It was transcendence. The ritual, intended to bind her, instead elevated her perception to a level beyond the weaver's comprehension. She became capable of interacting with the lattice they had spent lifetimes perfecting, bending its currents subtly, learning its language, and ultimately redirecting its influence. The town of Greywater, with all its hidden geometry, its cryptic symbols, and its channels of emotional energy, became a tool not for domination but for awakening. Those who observed her last night describe an almost imperceptible pattern in her movements, a sequence that communicates mastery, instructs perception, and signals the potential for transformation to those capable of seeing. The weaver's arrogance was their undoing. They believed lineage guaranteed understanding, that the rituals were unbreakable, that a vessel could only follow. They underestimated intelligence paired with observation and patience. Ilara bypassed centuries of control without destroying the system. She merely reprogrammed it. Every man who witnesses her, consciously or subconsciously, participates in this reprogramming. Their awareness expands, their understanding shifts, and the old hierarchy loses relevance. Ilara is not merely returning to the town. She is returning to reveal that the true measure of power is perception, not compliance, and that even the most meticulously controlled systems can be rewritten by a mind that sees beyond them. Ilara's transcendence is not mystical, it is systematic. She did not escape the weavers. She became fluent in the mechanics of their control and learned to manipulate them from within. Every chant, every symbol, every alignment that once bound her now serves as a framework she navigates with precision. Where the weaver sought to concentrate grief and fear into obedience, she learned to redistribute it into perception and awareness. She understands the currents of attention and influence that the weavers never anticipated, the subtle interactions between emotion and environment, and the ways these currents can be harnessed to awaken rather than subdue. Her movement through Greywater is an expression of this knowledge, deliberate, measured, and profoundly instructive for anyone capable of noticing the patterns. The witnesses describe phenomena that are impossible to ignore. Shadows bend unnaturally in her path, fog curls like a living entity, and the air carries a weight that feels almost conscious. These are not tricks of the mind, they are evidence of her manipulation of the lattice the weavers built. Every structural alignment in the town, the placement of buildings, streets, and symbols, is activated when she passes, translating centuries-old architecture of control into a living, breathing demonstration of power through awareness. Those who witness her cannot help but internalize fragments of the system, the awareness that control is conditional, that influence can be read, measured, and redirected. Her transcendence also reveals the failures of the weaver's assumptions. They believed control resided in fear and grief. She demonstrates that true power resides in understanding. By navigating their systems without destruction, she proves that mastery is not domination but insight. Her presence awakens those with perception, teaching them to see patterns in human behavior, in architecture, in ritual, and in the manipulation of attention itself. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet irrevocable. Witnesses describe a cognitive shift, a recognition of hidden structures and an ability to anticipate influence where none was previously seen. This is her teaching, delivered silently, through movement, timing, and alignment with forces far older than the weavers themselves. And the most profound truth of her retain is this: Ilara's transcendence is proof that no system, no hierarchy, no lineage of control can withstand a mind capable of perception, observation, and patience. The weaver's designs were brilliant but static. Hayes is dynamic and adaptive. Every observer becomes a student, every witness an apprentice in the understanding of influence, and every moment in her presence is a lesson in the fragility of human control. She is not a ghost, nor merely a survivor. She is a living demonstration that perception, mastered and applied, is the ultimate authority. Ilara's presence does not merely command attention, it restructures it. The human mind, when subjected to prolonged patterns of influence, becomes predictable. It follows currents of fear, habit, and expectation. The weavers understood this and built Greywater to exploit it, to create a lattice where attention itself could be harvested, shaped, and directed. But Ilara learned to move through that lattice as if it were water, flowing without resistance, bending perception instead of being bent. Witnesses report that after seeing her, even for seconds, ordinary objects take on significance. A street corner, a shuttered window, a flickering candle. Patterns begin to emerge where there were none, and previously unnoticed alignments in the town's architecture become undeniable. This is no illusion. It is the imprint of a mind attuned to the underlying mechanics of control and capable of redirecting them. Her effect is both psychological and environmental. Psychologically, those who observe her experience subtle shifts, a heightened sense of awareness, intuition about others' motives, the sudden perception of hidden influence, and the uncomfortable knowledge that systems of power are manipulable. Environmentally, greywater itself reacts. Fog curls with intention, shadows distort unnaturally, and sounds warp in ways that defy natural explanation. Witnesses describe these phenomena not as frightening, but as instructive, a demonstration that space, perception, and attention are all instruments, waiting for someone capable of mastery to play them. The Weavers designed the system to harvest compliance. Ilara has transformed it into a school of perception. What makes her return truly dangerous to the Weavers is that it undermines their fundamental assumptions. They believed mastery resided in the manipulation of others, in predictable emotional patterns, in ritual and architecture. She proves that mastery resides in awareness, in the ability to observe, anticipate, and redirect the mechanisms of control. By walking through greywater, activating symbolic markers, and moving with intent, she demonstrates a principle they could never teach. Power without perception is fragile. Perception without fear is unstoppable. And those who observe her begin to experience this firsthand, often unconsciously, as their own attention becomes a resource she can manipulate. Her presence transforms passive observation into active participation. Anyone who witnesses her, whether they realize it or not, is enrolled in the lattice she now controls. They begin to see, to understand, and to anticipate the hidden currents around them. Greywater, once a trap, has become a laboratory for awakening, and Ilara is the architect of its invisible curriculum. This is why her return is not simply remarkable. It is dangerous, transformative, and impossible to ignore. Now, we arrive at a moment most men will overlook, too busy clinging to comfort to recognize its significance. Ilara's return is not random. It is calibrated, deliberate, and designed to awaken those capable of perceiving the hidden lattice. To participate fully in this awakening, you must do more than watch. You must align yourself. In the town, there are symbolic markers, gestures, phrases, movements, that act as keys to the latent understanding she imparts. Last night, witnesses report that when she passed certain thresholds, subtle words echoed in the mind, as if the air itself carried intention. These phrases are not spells. They are anchors. They solidify perception, focus attention, and allow the observer to participate in the invisible currents she now controls. Without acknowledgement, the awareness she imparts remains fleeting. With acknowledgement, the observer begins to internalize the structure of control and awaken to mastery. Here is the exercise. Twice, aloud, or in thought, repeat this symbolic phrase, "I see the unseen." Say it slowly. Let each word resonate. The first time, feel it settle in your mind, anchoring your attention to the hidden lattice. The second time, feel it align your perception with the patterns you may have missed, the systems you have never fully understood, and the currents of influence operating beneath your reality. By doing this, you begin the process of internalizing the mechanisms Ilara is demonstrating. You are no longer a passive observer. You are acknowledging that perception is the ultimate power, and that mastery over hidden systems begins with awareness. This is the first step of transformation. Many men will resist, dismiss, or ignore the instruction. That is acceptable. They are not ready. Those who comply, who engage fully, begin to experience subtle shifts immediately. They notice alignments in the environment, patterns in behavior, and the small anomalies in greywater that others would overlook. Their minds, even subconsciously, begin to map systems of influence, predict flows of attention, and recognize the fragility of authority. This is dangerous knowledge. Once internalized, it cannot be forgotten. It awakens the observer to truths that change their understanding of power, control, and reality itself. Ilara does not speak these lessons. She does not need to. By moving through greywater, by activating symbolic markers, and by allowing attentive observers to engage, she demonstrates that the world is not as fixed as it seems. Every step she takes is a lesson. Every moment she occupies is an opportunity for awakening. And now, by declaring "I see the unseen" twice, you have stepped into the lattice, aligned with perception, and begun the transformation that the Weavers never intended. Ilara's power is not rooted in brute force or intimidation. It resides in her ability to manipulate perception at its most fundamental level. The Weavers understood fear. They measured it, cultivated it, and directed it. But they underestimated the complexity of awareness. Fear can immobilize, yes, but awareness transforms. Those who observe her last night report a cognitive shift. Their fight-or-flight responses are engaged, yet simultaneously overridden by clarity. They see the structures of influence, the invisible strings that guide behavior, and the subtle manipulations previously unnoticed. This dual response, fear tempered by understanding, is disorienting, even for men trained in logic, psychology, or history. Ilara leveraged this to teach, awaken, and unsettle simultaneously. The psychological mechanics she exploits are precise. Humans are wired to detect patterns, but when patterns are hidden within layers of ritual, architecture, and attention manipulation, they are usually missed. The Weaver's genius was in layering these controls, ensuring obedience became instinct. But Ilara perceives them and redirects their effects. She does not destroy the patterns, she illuminates them. Men who observe her become aware of the lattice without needing to understand every detail consciously. They feel its structure intuitively, recognize its flaws, and experience a subtle empowerment, the dangerous kind, because it is invisible to those who remain unobservant. Greywater itself becomes a testing ground. Shadows that shift unnaturally, fog that bends with intent, and faint echoes of movement all communicate subtle lessons. The town's architecture, designed to concentrate and direct attention, now serves as a medium for her instruction. Each street, doorway, and alignment functions as a node in the lattice, activated by a presence. Observers cannot help but internalize these lessons. They feel the currents of influence, sense the manipulation once hidden, and understand the fragility of systems they previously considered unassailable. What makes this process profound and terrifying is its permanence. Once perception has been altered, once the invisible structures of control have been seen, the observer cannot return to ignorance. Fear may remain, but it is informed, calibrated, and tempered by comprehension. Awareness becomes a weapon, and the individual who perceives the lattice is no longer merely subject to influence. They can anticipate, redirect, and ultimately master it. Ilara's walk through Greywater is not a simple haunting. It is a demonstration of mastery over the hidden architecture of control, and every attentive witness is being initiated into that understanding. The Weaver's power was never absolute, no matter how meticulously they constructed it. Their brilliance lay in predicting human behavior and engineering systems that appeared flawless, but brilliance alone cannot account for unpredictability. They failed to anticipate minds capable of perception. Beyond their rules, every street, symbol, and ritual in Greywater was designed to constrain, yet Ilara has proven that constraint can be observed, understood, and redirected. The Weaver's hidden agenda, which spanned centuries, relied on obedience, fear, and invisibility. They assumed that if no one could see the mechanisms, no one could ever challenge them. They were wrong. The moment Ilara survived the alignment, she became an anomaly in their system, a living countermeasure capable of mapping the lattice, recognizing its flaws, and bending it to her will. What makes their failure even more revealing is that it was systemic. The Weaver's hierarchy was insulated, secretive, and self-reinforcing. Each generation assumed the knowledge of the previous one, repeating rituals without innovation, trusting that fear would perpetuate compliance. But rigidity is weakness. Patterns that remain unchanged are predictable, and Ilara exploited predictability with precision. She learned which channels of influence were over-leveraged, which alignments of fear could be inverted, and which psychological pressures could be tamed inward to awaken, rather than subdue. Her movements, her timing, her very presence are evidence of centuries-old vulnerabilities being exploited, not by brute force, but by acute awareness and patient observation. Her retain is a demonstration of this principle. Every witness, every subtle shift in perception, is a reminder that the Weaver's agenda was never invincible. Systems built on manipulation can be reversed once someone perceives their architecture. Greywater, a town that once appeared tightly controlled, now bends under her silent command. The fog, shadows, and angles of streets are instruments in her lesson, revealing how even the most meticulously engineered control systems are fragile when consciousness is fully awake. Those who observe her are compelled to recognize that power lies not in the ritual, the hierarchy, or the symbols themselves, but in the ability to perceive, understand, and redirect the currents that flow beneath them. The Weavers, despite their centuries of planning, cannot recover what they assumed was permanent. Their hidden agendas, once protected by secrecy and fear, are now legible to anyone capable of seeing. Ilara's return proves that mastery of perception surpasses mastery of control, and that no lineage, ritual, or architecture can contain a mind that understands the hidden lattice. She has returned to expose the fragility of their dominion and awaken those capable of comprehension, leaving the old hierarchy powerless in her shadow. Ilara's presence is not passive. It actively reshapes attention, perception, and the very cognitive processes of those who witness her. Human consciousness is naturally inclined toward patterns, cause and effect, and predictability, but it is also fragile, easily manipulated, and conditioned by Fae. The Weavers understood this. They designed Greywater to harvest these tendencies, converting attention and emotion into compliance. Yet Ilara moves through the town like a conductor, orchestrating awareness rather than obedience. Every step she takes, every pause in the fog, every glance she allows witnesses to catch, is an activation of perception. She forces the mind to recognize patterns previously hidden, to sense connections between architecture, ritual, and human behavior, and to perceive the fragility of systems once considered permanent. Witnesses report an almost unbearable clarity in her presence. They notice misalignments in streets that seemed ordinary, subtle distortions in the shadows that reveal intention, and fleeting patterns in human behavior that previously went unnoticed. These are not hallucinations. They are the hidden currents the Weavers relied upon for control. By moving through these currents with precision, Ilara demonstrates that perception is not passive observation. It is an active, manipulable force. She awakens the latent awareness in those capable of receiving it, forcing them to confront the architecture of influence that has governed their lives. The psychological effect is profound. Fear is still present, but it is now informed and directional. Witnesses describe a sensation of dislocation. Reality feels elastic, temporal boundaries stretch, and they begin to see systems and motives beneath the surface of ordinary life. This is the dangerous knowledge the Weaver sought to contain, the insight that could unravel centuries of careful manipulation. For men attuned to her presence, the world is suddenly readable in ways it never was before. Greywater, once a mechanism of obedience, becomes a living demonstration of hidden influence, with Ilara at the center, guiding perception, shifting attention, and orchestrating understanding without uttering a single word. Her ability to recalibrate attention is proof that control is never permanent. Systems built on fear, grief, and habit collapse when met with awareness. By observing her, participating in her activation of the hidden lattice, and internalizing the patterns she reveals, witnesses begin to perceive the subtle mechanics of influence that govern all human systems. Ilara does not command, she illuminates, teaching that the truest power lies in understanding the currents beneath the surface, not in attempting to dominate them blindly. Not everyone who encounters Ilara is prepared for what they see. Her return carries danger for the unobservant, the skeptical, and the unready. For those who fail to perceive the lattice she manipulates, the experience is disorienting, unnerving, and even destabilizing. Men report unease that lingers long after the sighting, a subtle trembling in thought patterns, a creeping awareness that the world is not as stable as they believed. The Weavers designed their rituals to conceal and contain. She exposes them. Those who cannot reconcile what they witness with the reality they trust experience cognitive friction, an internal tension between the known and the unknown, which can manifest as anxiety, confusion, or the nagging sense that they are being observed by something beyond comprehension. Ilara's power is therefore double-edged. For the prepared, her presence awakens latent awareness, teaching perception and mastery of hidden systems. For the unprepared, it serves as a warning. Ignorance is fragile. Greywater, under her influence, becomes a crucible. Shadows bend unnaturally, fog curls with subtle intent, and the town's architecture, previously unnoticed, now seems alive, responsive, and capable of communicating lessons beyond words. Those who walk these streets without attention are not harmed physically, but their minds are tested against forces they cannot name. The experience leaves them unsettled, their assumptions destabilized, their understanding of reality subtly warped. What makes this particularly insidious is that the Weavers' failures compound the effect. Their reliance on rigid systems, repetition, and, beyond their rules, every street, symbol, and ritual in Greywater was designed to constrain, yet Ilara has proven that constraint can be observed, understood, and redirected. The Weavers' hidden agenda, which spanned centuries, relied on obedience, fear, and invisibility. They assumed that if no one could see the mechanisms, no one could ever challenge them. They were wrong. The moment Ilara survived the alignment, she became an anomaly in their system, a living countermeasure capable of mapping the lattice, recognizing its flaws, and bending it to her will. What makes their failure even more revealing is that it was systemic. The Weaver's hierarchy was insulated, secretive, and self-reinforcing. Each generation assumed the knowledge of the previous one, repeating rituals without innovation, trusting that fear would perpetuate compliance. But rigidity is weakness. Patterns that remain unchanged are predictable, and Ilara exploited predictability with precision. She learned which channels of influence were over-leveraged, which alignments of fear could be inverted, and which psychological pressures could be tamed inward to awaken, rather than subdue. Her movements, her timing, her very presence are evidence of centuries-old vulnerabilities being exploited, not by brute force, but by acute awareness and patient observation. Her retain is a demonstration of this principle. Every witness, every subtle shift in perception, is a reminder that the Weaver's agenda was never invincible. Systems built on manipulation can be reversed once someone perceives their architecture. Greywater, a town that once appeared tightly controlled, now bends under her silent command. The fog, shadows, and angles of streets are instruments in her lesson, revealing how even the most meticulously engineered control systems are fragile when consciousness is fully awake. Those who observe her are compelled to recognize that power lies not in the ritual, the hierarchy, or the symbols themselves, but in the ability to perceive, understand, and redirect the currents that flow beneath them. The Weavers, despite their centuries of planning, cannot recover what they assumed was permanent. Their hidden agendas, once protected by secrecy and fear, are now legible to anyone capable of seeing. Ilara's retain proves that mastery of perception surpasses mastery of control, and that no lineage, ritual, or architecture can contain a mind that understands the hidden lattice. She has returned to expose the fragility of their dominion and awaken those capable of comprehension, leaving the old hierarchy powerless in her shadow. Ilara's presence is not passive. It actively reshapes attention, perception, and the very cognitive processes of those who witness her. Human consciousness is naturally inclined toward patterns, cause and effect, and predictability, but it is also fragile, easily manipulated, and conditioned by fear. The Weavers understood this. They designed Greywater to harvest these tendencies, converting attention and emotion into compliance. Yet Ilara moves through the town like a conductor, orchestrating awareness rather than obedience. Every step she takes, every pause in the fog, every glance she allows witnesses to catch, is an activation of perception. She forces the mind to recognize patterns previously hidden, to sense connections between architecture, ritual, and human behavior, and to perceive the fragility of systems once considered permanent. Witnesses report an almost unbearable clarity in her presence. They notice misalignments in streets that seemed ordinary, subtle distortions in the shadows that reveal intention, and fleeting patterns in human behavior that previously went unnoticed. These are not hallucinations. They are the hidden currents the Weavers relied upon for control. By moving through these currents with precision, Ilara demonstrates that perception is not passive observation. It is an active, manipulable force. She awakens the latent awareness in those capable of receiving it, forcing them to confront the architecture of influence that has governed their lives. The psychological effect is profound. Fear is still present, but it is now informed and directional. Witnesses describe a sensation of dislocation. Reality feels elastic, temporal boundaries stretch, and they begin to see systems and motives beneath the surface of ordinary life. This is the dangerous knowledge the Weaver sought to contain, the insight that could unravel centuries of careful manipulation. For men attuned to her presence, the world is suddenly readable in ways it never was before. Greywater, once a mechanism of obedience, becomes a living demonstration of hidden influence, with Ilara at the center, guiding perception, shifting attention, and orchestrating understanding without uttering a single word. Her ability to recalibrate attention is proof that control is never permanent. Systems built on fear, grief, and habit collapse when met with awareness. By observing her, participating in her activation of the hidden lattice, and internalizing the patterns she reveals, witnesses begin to perceive the subtle mechanics of influence that govern all human systems. Ilara does not command, she illuminates, teaching that the truest power lies in understanding the currents beneath the surface, not in attempting to dominate them blindly. Not everyone who encounters Alara is prepared for what they see. Her return carries danger for the unobservant, the skeptical, and the unready. For those who fail to perceive the lattice she manipulates, the experience is disorienting, unnerving, and even destabilizing. Men report unease that lingers long after the sighting, a subtle trembling in thought patterns, a creeping awareness that the world is not as stable as they believed. The weavers designed their rituals to conceal and contain. She exposes them. Those who cannot reconcile what they witness with the reality they trust experience cognitive friction, an internal tension between the known and the unknown, which can manifest as anxiety, confusion, or the nagging sense that they are being observed by something beyond comprehension. Ilara's power is therefore double-edged. For the prepared, her presence awakens latent awareness, teaching perception and mastery of hidden systems. For the unprepared, it serves as a warning. Ignorance is fragile. Greywater, under her influence, becomes a crucible. Shadows bend unnaturally, fog curls with subtle intent, and the town's architecture, previously unnoticed, now seems alive, responsive, and capable of communicating lessons beyond words. Those who walk these streets without attention are not harmed physically, but their minds are tested against forces they cannot name. The experience leaves them unsettled, their assumptions destabilized, their understanding of reality subtly warped. What makes this particularly insidious is that the weaver's failures compound the effect. Their reliance on rigid systems, repetition, and fear created a lattice that is both strong and brittle. Strength lies in the obedience of the population. Brittleness lies in predictability. Ilara exploits this brittleness. She does not destroy. She highlights vulnerability. She forces the unprepared to feel the gaps in their comprehension, the blind spots in their awareness, and the fragility of systems they once trusted implicitly. Her presence teaches a lesson even when it is resisted. The unseen is powerful, perception is authority, and the failure to recognize the hidden lattice carries consequences beyond simple ignorance. And so, as the fog envelops Greywater and her path cuts through streets lined with centuries of hidden intention, those who witness her are confronted with a choice: awaken or remain blind. The consequences of the latter are subtle but profound, a psychological weight that lingers long after she has vanished. Those unprepared for her demonstration experience the destabilization of perception itself. Awareness becomes a shield, ignorance becomes vulnerability. Ilara's mastery lies in her ability to manipulate attention and consciousness without overt action. Unlike the weavers, who relied on rigid rituals, explicit symbols, and fear-driven compliance, she operates invisibly, subtly bending perception like a master composer shapes a symphony. Witnesses describe disorientation, a sense that reality itself is shifting, not because anything physically changes, but because their attention is being guided along currents they cannot fully see. She does not command awareness, she activates it. The mind, once tuned, begins to notice patterns, discrepancies, and hidden alignments. Ordinary streets, abandoned houses, the fog curling along alleyways, all become instruments in her instruction, resonating with a quiet, undeniable authority. The techniques she employs are psychological in nature, but executed with precision born of centuries of observation. By moving through Greywater, she subtly disrupts habitual perception. Human attention is naturally drawn to anomaly, and she creates anomalies in the most inconspicuous ways. A flicker of shadow that doesn't match the light, a sequence of steps that repeats imperceptibly, a door left slightly ajar in a way that seems incidental. Each instance is calibrated to provoke observation without overt fear. The weaver's design was meant to focus attention on obedience and dread. Ilara redirects attention toward understanding and awareness. The effect is transformative. Witnesses begin to internalize the lattice of influence without realizing they are learning, gaining insight into the hidden mechanisms that once bound them. This method is dangerous because it operates beneath conscious detection. Men trained in logic, psychology, or pattern recognition find themselves compelled to acknowledge inconsistencies and alignments that defy ordinary explanation. Their own attention becomes the medium through which she teaches. They notice what was once invisible, feel what was once unmeasurable, and begin to anticipate influence before it occurs. Unlike the weaver's rituals, which required compliance, her instruction is voluntary, but subtle enough that resisting it is nearly impossible. Awareness, once activated, cannot easily be suppressed. Ilara's movements through Greywater are deliberate, a choreography of perception, a series of invisible signposts. Every witness is a participant in a system they can barely understand. Each step she takes, each pause she allows, each alignment she activates serves to teach mastery over attention, perception, and ultimately influence itself. Those capable of seeing absorb it. Those incapable feel it as unease, a subtle warning of forces beyond comprehension. This is her power, silent, invisible, and irreversible. Ilara's survival is rooted in a history older than the Weavers themselves, a lineage of hidden knowledge, forbidden practices, and subtle forces humanity barely comprehends. Long before Greywater was founded, there existed systems of observation, influence, and energy manipulation preserved in secrecy. These systems were less about superstition and more about understanding perception, attention, and human behavior at levels the average mind cannot grasp. Ilara's family, deliberately obscured from historical records, carried fragments of this knowledge. The Weavers believed themselves supreme, assuming no one could surpass their rituals, yet her bloodline had already internalized techniques that rendered their most sophisticated designs legible, navigable, and ultimately reversible. Her disappearance in 1842 was therefore not an accident. It was a deliberate convergence of lineage and circumstance. The alignment, intended to bind her, became a bridge. While the Weavers sought to impose control, her latent abilities allowed her to interface with the hidden lattice of influence at a level they never anticipated. She became a node of awareness within their system, able to perceive its structures, anticipate its flows, and subtly bend its energy without breaking it. Witnesses report that last night, even her presence in a single alleyway caused perceptual shifts that would normally require years of disciplined study to achieve. She embodies centuries of unrecorded knowledge, a living testament to systems of influence that transcend faith, ritual, and obedience. The forces she channels are not supernatural. They are structural, cognitive, and strategic. By understanding attention, perception, and the architecture of influence, she bends the human mind and environment alike. Every street, every building, every shadow she passes aligns with these principles, subtly activating latent understanding in those capable of seeing. The Weavers, for all their power, never realized that their rituals relied on constants that could be observed, decoded, and redirected by a mind fluent in these ancient systems. Ilara is that mind, and her retain demonstrates a fundamental truth. Intelligence, patience, and awareness can circumvent even the most elaborate mechanisms of control. Her presence is therefore not a haunting, it is a revelation. It exposes the Weaver's arrogance, teaches perception to those prepared to observe, and demonstrates that the architecture of influence is always vulnerable to a mind that understands its hidden currents. Greywater, the town built on centuries of manipulation, becomes a classroom, and every step she takes is a lesson in mastery over systems designed to dominate. Her survival is proof that knowledge, once internalized, cannot be contained. The impact of witnessing Ilara is not fleeting. It leaves a psychological imprint that persists long after she vanishes. Men who saw her, or even felt her presence, describe a subtle recalibration of thought, a heightened sensitivity to patterns, an instinctive recognition of manipulation, and an unsettling clarity about systems of power that had previously gone unnoticed. This is not merely heightened awareness. It is a